yeah, I don't do any introductions. I just like to jump right into it.
Let's do it.
So you're really perfect for for my show, because I cover both comic books and film. I get a lot of screenwriters that watch. I get a lot of comic writers, filmmakers, and stuff like that. And you perfectly hit both categories in mainstream levels, and really kind of all through the gambit. So you've done everything from major motion pictures with agents and managers, and moved to other agents and managers and stuff. So I'm just gonna basically what I know, or like I first found out about you, I want to say 15, 20 years ago. I was in high school, and basically a mutual connection gave me a series of scripts because I wanted to write, and they knew that I wanted to become a screenwriter ultimately, and they're like, look at this stuff. This is the kind of stuff that's getting sold. And one of those was Five Killers, which ultimately became Killers. And what was interesting to me about it, because whenever I went to the theaters and so excited to go see it, I was like, this is not the script I read. I was like, they like ruined it. And I remember being really disappointed in like, I was like, why wouldn't they just do what was written? So at one point I want to get into like how that all came about. And I also know that you wrote, um, it was like an anthology with Brendan Fraser that came out around the same time. And I remember going, it was like right as Blockbuster was maybe ending, and it was at Redbox, and I remember going to see that, and I remember thinking like, man, this should be a big movie. And it was at Redbox and things, but it was just one of those where it's like, wow, this has stars, it has everything, but it never like took off. And it,
I like how all these stories basically can end with the question, what happened?
yeah. All I want to know is what went wrong. No, I'm kidding. But
Yep.
and then also, yeah, actually, this is another what went wrong is for
Uh-huh.
the comic fans, Kane and Lynch.
Hmm.
You were either wrote that's a comic series. I think it's a DC.
No, it was originally it was brought to us as a video game.
Oh, okay.
So this was
Um,
it was before the game was released. So we had to adapt a video game that we couldn't actually play. But did they turn it into a comic book series
I
eventually?
think, yeah, it was a comic series, I think,
That's
for a
rad. That's a
while
good idea.
with either Marvel or DC. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Phil, those are the three things that I know. And then it's really interesting that I you happen to have a viral tweet that rekindled my memory of like, that's I know that guy, that's Bob
Mhm.
DeRosa. And and then it just I was like, this is perfect. I gotta have him on to talk about, you were basically talking about sort of the aspects of modern screenwriters to sort of what to do to keep going, keep write your way out of a pickle.
Oh
And it's
yeah.
like, and then over 20 years of experience in this realm. So I guess I will just say, can you start us with basically where was sort of the first moment you'd say your career as a screenwriter began, and how did you go about management, agents, getting the air I breathe off the ground, and killers and all that?
Okay. Yeah, it started. I mean, I'm from Orlando, and after I graduated college, like I was making short films in at the University of Florida, and I moved back home. And at the moment, they were saying that Orlando was going to be, they were calling it Hollywood East because they had big movies were coming through there, and Nickelodeon Studios were shooting shows there. So I came back after college with a couple of short films and then starting writing scripts, going, oh, great, I'm going to be a filmmaker in Hollywood East. And then Hollywood East didn't happen, but for a lot of reasons, it's still a great community and a great place to make films. But as a result, like there were these, it was just this amazing kind of moment and place to be a creative person. There was an incredible film festival, the Florida Film Festival, that I worked at for several years. There was an incredible theater scene and fringe festival scene, and then filmmaking scene. Like all the guys who made Blair Witch Project all went to the University of Central Florida kind of before it was on the map. It was just a small college back then, and then that, of course, blew up. I knew all those guys back in the day where they're all struggling filmmakers. So I had a front row seat to that happening. So like Orlando was late 90s Orlando was a moment and a scene. A lot of really cool stuff came out of it. And so I was writing scripts and I was doing improv and I was kind of a jack of all trades. And let's see, I wrote a script called Shooting Blanks. It was sort of a Tarantino-esque multi-thread kind of intertwining story that got a local producer optioned it and got Michael Rappaport and Jennifer Tilly and a bunch of great indie actors attached to it. And the movie didn't happen, but it was the first step of me realizing, oh, I think I can make it professionally in this business. And so I wrote a script called Gifted that was a romantic dramedy about a young woman couple and know their romantic fate, but couldn't tell the same for herself. And I had, I'd made a couple of short films, and I met a local producer named Christopher, and he hired me to rewrite a script that he was producing, and we just hit it off. And he moved to LA. We kept in touch, and so I sent him Gifted. And at that time, he had moved into sort of a management track, and so he was an assistant for Jerry Seinfeld's managers at the time. And so he read Gifted and called me up crying, going, "This is amazing. You got to come out and visit." And so I came out to LA for 2 weeks and slept on his couch and drove around. And I had a bunch of friends that had started moving out from Orlando at the same time. And so, I kind of met up with my friends. It was around that time I had been an assistant programmer at the Florida Film Festival, which because of that, I just met tons of filmmakers and got, met producers and just started to meet professionals in the industry. And one of those guys was Jiho Lee, who had an award-winning short at Sundance. And my job was to call him up and, beg him to come, not beg him, trick him into coming to our festival to accept an award. And we totally hit it off. And so he was one of the guys that I met up with when I came out to LA for the first time. And the time he was flying back and forth because, he's American-born Korean. So he was flying back and forth between here and Seoul making music videos. And so that was a connection that I kind of, was just a good friend and a cool guy and a great filmmaker. And so we kept in touch. So when I moved out to LA, like I had no money saved up. I had kind of Gifted under my arm. I had some friendships. I had an assistant to a manager that was a buddy of mine. And that was sort of that's kind of what I came out with. Do you want to jump in or do you
You
want me to keep
basically
going?
had, okay, so let me get this. You had quite a few connections from working at the film festival in University of
Yeah.
Central Florida, plus other colleagues from UCF. Which, by
Yep.
the way, whenever I was in high school, I wanted to go to University of Central Florida and got denied.
Yeah.
I,
Oh,
and then you came out here with basically one feature screenplay under your belt.
well, I mean, Shooting Blanks had gotten
Okay,
optioned and that was cool, but I wasn't using it as a sample. I'd probably written about a dozen scripts at that point.
okay, that's where I
But
was gonna. Okay, so you really
yeah,
did have a lot of writing under your belt.
here's the thing. Everybody talks about paying your dues. I paid a lot of dues in Orlando. I wrote a dozen scripts. I made short films that played film festivals. I toured to festivals. I toured the Canadian Fringe Circuit with my improv troupe. I'd made tons of theater. I'd written and directed. I was an assistant casting director. I was an actor. I did commercials. I just did a lot of stuff in Orlando. I paid a lot of dues. And like at the center of that was my screenwriting. So when I moved out to LA, I was like, okay, I moved out here to to forward my screenwriting. And the one of the best things I did was I kind of just made the deal with myself. I said, you know what? I was a jack of all trades in Orlando. I'm not going to do that in LA. I'm going to write scripts. I'm going to do improv on the side with my troupe, and that's it. And that's what I'm going to focus on. And Gifted was my newest script. It was the script that, Christopher at the time had started showing to people. Young executives read it and they loved it, but it was kind of too small for them to champion or to buy. But it was, it got me a few general meetings. But Gifted was kind of the first sample that I had that mattered, that people read in the industry. But it was definitely one of those where they read it and they were like, okay, can you write a studio movie? Can you write, a movie that we're going to be able to take to our bosses and buy? So that was like Gifted kind of got me in some doors, but then I had to prove myself. And so I wrote, it was Christopher who like said, "Hey, you write great characters, great, dialogue. You love indie films. Can you kind of re-embrace your love of genre of like comic books and horror and science fiction?" and kind of meld the two. And this was before the MCU. It was before kind of these amazing times we have where you can write really A-list elevated genre stuff. Back then, it was like you're either making real movies or you're making schlocky B stuff. And so I wrote, an across time zombie killing movie called Hatchet Club. But it had really good characters, and had good dialogue, had a really, some heartbreak in it. And so I gave it to Christopher, and he was like, "Yeah, this is the one." He showed it to his boss, who read it and said, "Yeah." Sent it to a colleague at ICM who met with me and signed me, and that's how I got my first agent.
Whoa.
So it was kind of that jump from Gifted to Hatchet Club, and then Hatchet Club was one of those situations where, and it still happens like this, but not as cool as it used to, which is like a script would go out and instantly everybody would read it and producers would take territories. And that's what happened with my script. So my agent sent it out and producers would then choose which studio they were going to take it into. So like Joel Silver took it into Warner Brothers, I remember. Somebody took it into Universal, I don't remember who. There was a night where I'm, in my little Burbank apartment about to go to sleep going, everybody's in town is reading my script tonight. My life can completely change tomorrow. And I woke up and my life didn't change because like the script didn't sell, but a lot of people liked it. It almost sold at a couple places, just never happened. But I got 30 to 40 general meetings out of it. And so I did what they call the water bottle tour. And I went and took all these meetings. And one of them was with an executive who had read Gifted. And it was Naveen Makalharji, who at the time, he's a producer now, and we're actually working together on a project. But back in the day, he was working at Revolution Studios for Todd Garner, who's now a huge producer on his own. And Naveed had read Gifted, then he read Hatchet Club and goes, "Great, you're ready to write a studio project." And so they had a writer fall out of an original idea that Todd had that kind of wanted an Americanized version of Amelie. And so I put together a pitch, and Naveed helped me, and I walked it in and I pitched it to Todd, which was one of the scariest meetings that I've ever had. But Todd was great. And so I pitched, and on the way home, my cell phone rang, and it was Naveed calling me saying, "You got the job." And that was my first screenwriting job in Hollywood. It's the script that got me into the WGA and kind of launched my career from there.
And that was not spec. That was like someone else's idea, and they said, write this.
They had an idea, and it was like, essentially like a 60-second pitch. And then they had a writer, but then all of a sudden he got fancy and too expensive for them. So he dropped out. And so, yeah, so then they basically had this, like I said, 60-second pitch, and they're like, "What can you do with that?" And so I put together a full take, and it was mainly, an overall arcing story, and it had some big trailer moments in my pitch, I recall. And it was like a sort of it was like a romantic comedy with some magical realism, which is kind of what Gifted is. And so I seemed like the right guy for it, and they took a chance on me, which I'm grateful for. The movie never got made. I did 2 drafts for them. But like I said, it got me the WGA and launched my career, and everything kind of moved on from there.
That's awesome. I don't have anything to add to that.
Cool.
It's kind of like you. To me, it's as if you followed the exact sort of the playbook that everyone does and sort of should go through, to where it's like wrote a whole lot, had some things that got me meetings, and that at least showed that I had the right talent that people were looking for. And then when the opportunity arose, you were hired. So then, how did that then move to? Did you sell like uh anything on spec like through that, or like were you writing basically that and then also writing your own stuff at night, or sort of kind of thing?
What I was doing, because when I got this, at the time when I first moved to LA, I was kind of doing some random acting gigs that were paying my bills. And then when I sold the pitch to Revolution, I stopped all that and just focused on my screenwriting. And so what that did is then I started in sort of like the welcome to Hollywood screenwriting path, with which then, I've I got a sample in Hatchet Club. I've just booked a job with a studio. So then I was able to keep taking general meetings, but I was all able to start pitching for open writing assignments, which are, that's what my first job was. But it was, I booked some more after that. And what those generally are, it's either we've got an idea and we need somebody to crack it, or we've got a script that doesn't quite work, we need some help, or we've optioned a comic book and we want somebody to adapt it. And so I kind of started, I went on that path. And this is, you're right, this is a very similar path to a lot of screenwriters, which is like they write that script, it gets them the first job, and then they're out there pitching. They're pitching on assignments, trying to get the next job. Simultaneously, right when I moved to LA, a friend of mine produced an evening of my one act plays, and I invited Jiho, who came to see it. Which, if you lived in LA, you'd realize nobody does that. Nobody comes to your play when you introduce them, when you invite them. So that was exciting. He actually came, and then I'm joking, by the way. I have a lot of good friends that come see my theater, but
Yeah,
to
yeah.
you know to have somebody I've met maybe 3 times actually come see my show, I was like, wow. But
Yeah.
he loved my dialogue, and he's like, hey, I've got this idea for what I want to be my debut feature, because he'd done a bunch of short films, and it was gonna be Korean language, shot in Seoul, and he had 4 different storylines that were going to intertwine, all based on a Chinese proverb about the 4 emotional cornerstones of life, and he wanted me to write one of them, the pleasure vignette. And they were all, it's kind of a mix of some magical realism, gangster stuff, crime drama, romantic drama. So it was kind of a mix of genres. But he brought me in to write the pleasure vignette, which was very much sort of like a crime drama. And so I wrote that vignette for him, and then he wrote the other 3 and put them all together. And it wasn't what he wanted it to be. And so I read it, and I was like, Jiho, I think I know what you want. Just give me 2 weeks with it. And I took it and I did a full polish of the whole script. And then I gave it back to him, and he's like, this is it. And at the time, my manager, Christopher, had become a manager in his own right at this point. He's no longer an assistant. And so then he signed Jiho and started, working with us to find producers to come on and get this film made. And that was the film that became The Air I Breathe. So I was simultaneously kind of on these 2 paths. One was like I was working on this passion project with Jiho, but I was also pitching and booking the occasional studio assignment. So there was one a director, kind of a new director, but a hot shot. He had a couple movies in his belt. People were really expecting big things from him, and so he was looking for somebody to kind of co-write this passion project of his, sort of similar to what I was doing at Jiho, but this was going to be a paid gig because there was a studio behind it. And so I was high. I pitched on that. I got that job. That job ended up not. I worked on it for 3 months, and then the whole deal fell apart before I was ever paid. And so the studio felt bad. So they gave me a job rewriting kind of a comic book movie that they had based on a Thor comic that was not Marvel Comics. It's called Hammer of the Gods.
Okay.
And they literally, like, they had a script, and they just tossed the script, and they just gave me a 1 line kind of pitch of what they wanted to do. And then I pitched them a version, and they owed me a job. So they hired me to write that. So that was a job I did. And that was, so I did a couple of gigs like that, things that never got made. And the key to working with Jiho is we got something made. So,
Yeah.
like, it took Gio and I 2 years to kind of get that script to where we wanted it, then 2 years to get that movie fully financed and cast, which was a whole journey in and of itself. And then, 2 years from, producing the film, shooting the film in Mexico City, all the way through post-production, festival release, and then finally a theatrical release. So that was a 6-year journey to get that made. And the whole time I'm taking jobs and pitching on stuff, and occasionally I'd book stuff, but Air I Breathe kind of mattered the most, because that movie is my heart, but also we got something made, which, as you know, it's why a lot of people make comic books, because you can get stuff made and you can show it to somebody and say, look what I spent all my time on. And they go, great. Whereas you can work 10 years in the movie business and never put a project,
Well, yeah,
never
that's
see something
most
made.
people I talk to who are screenwriters. It's like you you would know people I've worked with, but you've never seen anything I've written, even though I've been writing for 10 years professionally, because
Yep.
nothing's been made. It's
Yeah.
so wild. Yeah, for what I want my audience to understand is you basically not just paying your dues. It's like by the time an original story went to screen of something that you wrote, you're probably over 20 scripts written professionally, and you were at 12 at least before you even made it to LA.
I,
So
I,
it's
I have a list. I think Air I Breathe was like my 18th or 19th script that and that one I co-wrote with Jiho. And then, yeah, so, Shooting Blanks was technically, I sold Shooting Blanks at one point, but then I got the rights back. That Shooting Blanks was probably my 10th script. Gifted was my 12th. It takes a long time. And people that write their first script and go, tell me how to sell it, I'm usually like, write 5 more scripts and then we'll talk. Because it takes a long time to learn the craft and learn how to write a good script, but also it's just so hard to get anything made. You have to put a lot of irons in the fire out there. You have to have a lot of projects kind of making the rounds because you never know what's going to be the one that's going to actually catch fire and get made. You never know which script is going to be. Hatchet Club never got made, but it got me work. It got me jobs, and it still gets. It's gotten optioned a couple of times. It's still a project that people call me about. So maybe it'll get made someday. I don't know, but you never know kind of what the purpose is of the script you're writing. At the very least, it teaches you something, but often it helps your career in one way or another. And then every once in a while you get lucky and something gets made. And that's kind of the
Yeah.
odds that we're dealing with.
So you don't have to reveal all the like dirty little secrets behind the scenes, but as much as you're willing to share, like what was the full experience of Five Killers from like how did it go from to where it actually made the rounds to getting sold? How
Mm-hmm.
much, what did that deal look like from your end?
Yeah.
How much did it change from your, and like, did you know about the changes? How much were you able to be involved in that? What does it
Yeah.
look like? Do they ever give you sort of an option to be a producer on something like that or?
Well, I'll start at the beginning. And just to set context, like Air I Breathe, I got to be on set every day because Jiho wanted me there. So the director has the ability to go, writer, come be a part of this. So I got to see the making of that movie. I was on set. I was in all the producer meetings. I had the dream first experience. Killers was a totally different experience, also a dream, but just it was a very complicated. It was my first. It was my education in studio filmmaking, which is much different than indie filmmaking. So I came back after having made Air I Breathe, and I was so excited because people love that script, and I was like, I'm going to work like crazy. And then my manager at the time was like, "Yeah, you can't use that as a sample because you co-wrote it with Jiho." I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And I hadn't written anything in a while since that really stuck the landing since like Hatchet Club. So I had an old sample. I needed a new sample, and so I just kind of took everything I loved about studio filmmaking. I jammed it into one script, and it was like I wanted to write a fun action movie, high concept, but for a price. It was romantic, but not a big love story. It was funny, but not an outright comedy, and with heart. And so I put all that into this script called Five Killers. And it was this basic idea about a, retired hitman whose wife doesn't know what he used to do for a living, who wakes up one morning and discovers that there's a contract on his head, and there's 5 killers have accepted the contract, but they've all had a 3-year head start to get hidden within his life. So it could be anybody in his life. It could be his best friend at work, his neighbor, his mailman, anybody. So he's got to figure out who's trying to kill him while keeping his marriage together. And so
Great
I
hook, by
wrote,
the way.
what's that?
It's a genius hook, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, it was the best idea I've ever had. So I wrote a first draft and I gave it to Christopher, and he's like it, don't love it. He gave me some notes, gave me a copy of Save the Cat, which had just been published at the time, and I read it, and it was like a lightning bolt because it was like I had all the right beats, they were just kind of in the wrong order. And so I reboarded the movie and kind of in this fever pace, I did a rewrite and I turned it in to Christopher, and he called me up the day after my birthday. I'll never forget it. And he was like, "You knocked it out of the park." I'm like, "Okay." So, I'd left my agent at the time. So at first he was like, the plan was like, we're not trying to sell a script, we're trying to get a movie made. So let's get a good agency. And so we sent it out to a few agents. I took some meetings. I ended up signing with a team of agents at Endeavor who were, just super, super hot on the script and loved it. And, they wanted, to help me with my career. And so I started working with my agents at Endeavor. And then at the same time, Jiho and Air I Breathe was about to come out. And so various distributors were watching Air I Breathe, and Lionsgate saw Air I Breathe and really liked it. They didn't end up distributing it, but you know, they liked Jiho and and they wanted to see if there's something we could work on together. So we went and pitched on an open writing assignment to adapt Kane and Lynch, which at the time I said was a unreleased video game. Um, but they just gave us some artwork and gave us an idea what the story would be like. And so we pitched them a version of that. And they said, okay, and they hired us to do the gig. And the idea would be that we would co-write the script and then Jiho would direct the movie. And so um, at the same time, Killers was, had been going out to agents, and we were kind of just starting to formulate our strategy of who we were going to show Killers to. And Lionsgate called and they were like, hey, we just hired Bob to co-write this thing with Jiho. Could we hear he's got a new sample. Could we read it? And Christopher's like, no. And they're like, because you don't want to show it to the buyer until you're ready. And they called back and they're like, what if we've already read it and would like to maybe buy it? Christopher
Whoa.
said no. So, and then they called back and they're like, what if we offered you this amount of money? And so at the time, I was having these big gaps between my jobs. So like I wasn't really getting ahead on my finances. So I was still in debt, living in my Burbank apartment. And now they're offering me six figures for my script for the first time in my career. And I'm like, are you sure we don't want to take this offer? And and eventually they called back and made a very, very serious offer. They made me the offer I could not refuse. It was for a lot of money. It was like a six-figure option. So they had a year and a half to make the movie. And if they didn't make the movie, I get the script back and get to keep the money. It was a very
Wow,
serious,
yeah, that is sort of a
it was a
no-brainer.
very rare and serious offer. But they were really hot because like they weren't making big movies back then. This is before
I was gonna
Hunger
say, I was like, this is
Games.
Lionsgate when Lionsgate was before a big deal, and then
Right.
and
Like
before they
they
became less of a big deal.
they were more of a horror place. They did the Saw movies and
Saws, yeah.
they had successful movies, but they never done any like studio movies. And so they were really like they were wanting to get into the Jason Statham business, for instance. And I was like, I felt I wrote like the best $25 million Jason Statham movie I possibly could. So it was obvious they wanted to like pick up the script and make that sort of like that size movie. So they made me a really, aggressive offer and we took it and we said, okay. And I signed my deal. I'll never forget this. It was like one day away from, I think, my 6-year anniversary in LA. I went to my lawyer's office. I signed my contract for Kane and Lynch and Five Killers on the same day. That was a really good day.
Yeah.
So Jiho and we went off and we wrote the script for Kane and Lynch and we turned that in. Turned out they'd all hired another writer to also write a script for Kane and Lynch, and we didn't know this, but we were competing scripts and we lost, so they went with the
Oh,
other script. Yeah, that's a long story.
okay.
Gio was still attached to direct that version for a while, but then eventually he stepped off that movie, so that's a whole thing that happened. But at the same time, like Killers was, hopefully going to be the big to do, and so um, I was not involved as a producer, but Christopher was. Christopher and his producing partner at the time, Chad. I'm saying not producing partner. He and his buddy Chad had a management company together. So they were both brought on as executive producers. And though I didn't have the same sort of like, I wasn't in every meeting the way I was Air I Breathe, because my manager at the time was a producer on the film. It did give me kind of a front row seat to the process of how
Yeah.
everything shook out. So I did get to kind of see how it all happened. So like, they took an ad out in the trades and announced they had a director. And that was it. Like we were like, wait, who? Did we not get to talk about that? Anyways, they picked a director, super nice guy. I met with him and did a couple drafts of the script for him. I turned in my draft like right before the writer strike of 2007, 2008. So I turned in my draft, went on strike. By the time I was done, by the time the strike was over, that director had left the project. They brought in a second director who was great. I loved working. I did 2 drafts with him, loved working with that second director, and he had a vision in his head. And the movie was already starting to get kind of bigger. Like that director saw like a $40 million version of the movie with The Rock, who was not even Dwayne Johnson at the time. This was early Rock days. And The Rock came in. I wasn't there for this, but hang on, I'm gonna drink some water. Dwayne came in with his entire entourage and had a big meeting with Lionsgate. He said, I want to do this movie. I just want to do the Tooth Fairy first. And Lionsgate said no. So Lionsgate passed on Dwayne Johnson. And that $40 million version with that director and The Rock that would have been kind of the movie I envisioned, and that would have been a different career for me. I would have gotten paid less for reasons I'll explain in a moment, but that's, there's a part of me that always kind of misses that version didn't get made. But so, they passed on the rock, and so they moved on. And then at the time, Lionsgate acquired another company. I forget what they're called, but the head of that company somehow became the guy who oversaw Five Killers. Like, he became the boss of the guy that was like the boss of production at Lionsgate. I don't know how that happened. His name's Joe Drake, and he's a massively successful like film executive at this point. But so Joe Drake kind of inherited Five Killers, and it was, I think, Joe's vision for like, hey, my action movie with a rom-com subplot, he wanted to be a straight up rom-com with some action in it. So I think it was when Joe came on that it sort of flipped the intentions. And so the first thing they did, and I was lucky. I got to work with two different directors, do a bunch of drafts. I stayed on that movie for a while, but eventually, especially when there's like this feeling of like they want a script to go in a different direction, they bring in a new writer. So they went out and they got Ted Griffin, who wrote Ocean's 11, and was a huge studio rewrite guy. It was kind of a big deal for Lionsgate to get him, and so they went to Ted Griffin and asked him to rewrite my script. And I'll never forget because my manager at the time was a producer. He would just sneak me the scripts when they would come in. So he gave me Ted's draft, and I was reading it going, oh, this is very different. Like, it was still sort of my movie, but things were moved around and there were new characters and almost all my dialogue was gone. And I was like, oh gosh. So I had been rewritten. And then I yeah, and then like a stream of very expensive screenwriters came on after me. And then eventually they made an offer to Ashton Kutcher, who came on to star and produce the film. At that time, the second director said, no thanks, he left. And then so there was a moment when we had nobody attached except Ashton, and we're like, oh my gosh, is the movie going to fall apart? And then he got Rob Luketic, who is a huge romantic comedy
Legally
director.
Blonde. Yeah, I
Legally
remember
Blonde,
him.
like,
He was a
yeah,
big name at that time.
big name. So he came on, and he had just worked with Katherine Heigl. So he brought her on. But it's that kind of stuff. I never forget there was a moment with all these rewrites and stars and like jockeying for producing credit and stuff like that. I'll never forget Christopher called me one day and he's like, I really think your movie's going to get made now because we're finally at a point when everybody can take credit for something. Because there was like 8 producers at that point, all these big Lionsgate executives, and everybody could go, well, I found the script. Oh, I brought in Ted Griffin. I brought in Ashton. I got Katherine Heigl aboard. Like, everybody could like take credit for something on the movie. So everybody was kind of on the same page. Everybody could be a hero in the moment. And so they greenlit the movie. And the thing is my $25 million little action movie became a $75 million film, the biggest movie Lionsgate had ever made at that point.
Whoa. Whoa.
Yeah. And
So
that's how
then did that change your cut of the salary?
I got paid a lot more.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay.
Lionsgate was mad. Like, they wanted to redo my deal. My agent said no. So they had to pay me a lot of money. So I got really
So
lucky. I
you
got to
went from like a six-figure option and like that's the life-changing to like truly how long was the gap between like signing that first contract to like principal photography? Like 2 years or
probably 2 years. It feels about right.
okay.
It took me
And
about a
then
year to write the script and then 2 years to kind of for everything to be put together.
so when you get like you said you work with the first director and the second director, at what point, like from the director's perspective, like how far along in the process is it to them? Like, does the director get paid at that point to talk with you, or how does that work? Or is he truly like you guys just creatively, like, it seems so crazy to me that you would spend so much time on so many things that just like don't go anywhere. And like if you're assuming it's about to go somewhere and then doesn't, and this kind of stuff happens all the time, I feel like everybody would just be like not as serious or something like that.
No, it's just that's the job, and everybody knows it, and it doesn't mean that people like it. I think it's why people are so stressed out, is you have to juggle a lot of potential jobs, and you may not be getting paid for any of them. and it's really stressful. And that's why this job is really, really tough, and it's not for everybody. So you know, you know, the directors that came on to Killers, they're like, you know, they're studio guys. So I think they get paid a small amount, like a little stipend up front to kind of officially attach them. If they step away, they might get a fee, a small fee, but they don't get the big paycheck until the cameras roll. It's just,
Yeah.
it's the same thing with producers. So like, I think producers, like once a big studio producer brings the script to the studio, and that, you know, the studio says, great, we're going to buy this script and start developing, that producer gets like 25 grand, which that's not chump change, but you can't run a company with that. You can't pay employees. You can't put your kids through school in LA with that for very long. So
Yeah.
like, that's why if you look at IMDb Pro and you look at producers, you know, that's why they have 50 projects in development, is because they just don't know which ones are going to go, and they have to, you know, just have a lot of irons in the fire. And so same thing with directors. And the thing is, like, these are all studio guys, you know, like working with Jiho, working with my good friend Ben Rock, who Ben and I have, we did a bunch of, you know, stuff later in my career. And Ben's one of the guys who worked on Blair Witch Project. And then we've got, you know, Ben's, you know, directed an indie feature and got a lot of, he's always got various projects in development, and he maybe not getting a buck, but he has to like stay involved and oversee rewrites and meet with actors and try to get movies made. And like, so even like everybody's doing that. It's just, at what level are you at your career? And, you know, how much do the studios pay to keep you involved? Do you have a great career on the side shooting commercials or doing episodic television? Some people do, some people don't. It's just really, that's a big part of the job, is like, how many things can you juggle, you know, and how long can you hang in there before something finally goes and you get paid, honestly,
Yeah. And
you know?
it's, I talk about this in comics as well too, although it's just on a whole another higher level of magnitude with in the industry, I guess, especially with movies. But it's like your life is, you're hanging on the thread of your hits,
Yeah.
sort of. You
Yeah.
know, everything else is just trying to barely make it along until you get that next one that carries the weight of everything else you've done over the past 6 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Um, but that reminds me, earlier you said you couldn't send out a sample because it was co-written with Jiho. Why is that? Do they not like co-written scripts as samples?
No, it's just they don't know if they're like going to interview me for a job, they want me to rewrite, you know, the action scenes in this script, and they love the action and Air I Breathe. They don't know if I wrote it or Jiho wrote those particular moments. So it just doesn't work that way. So it's like, if Jiho, and for jobs like for Kane and Lynch, Air I Breathe was perfect because Gio and I co-wrote that script, and we were going to co-write Kane and Lynch, so that we could use it for jobs that we were going to be co-writing. But for me to go after a job by myself, I need a script written just by me. And I mean, I should mention that because I think a lot of young writers or aspiring writers in LA, they do that. They like co-write scripts with three different people because they're trying to get they're juggling those various projects, but they have three different projects with three different co-writers. And what they don't realize is, if one of them sells, those other projects are kind of dead. Like, they can't use the momentum that they have with this other writer A to help their projects with writer B and writer C. So
Yeah,
it's like, it's if and the thing is like, if that project sells and you're off to the races, this person is now your writing partner. You are married together. I think a lot of people just try stuff, and I'm like, no, no, don't write a script with somebody unless you're prepared to like have a 10-year career with that person. So like
I'm in
Gino and
that
I were,
exact scenario. That's why I brought that up because
yeah,
my like biggest claim to fame was co-written by a writing partner that we still write a lot of stuff together, most of our stuff, but and we also had an artist that did that book with us, and I've gotten a bunch of meetings and sort of offers in the comic industry to do books, but they don't want me. They want the full team. And
yeah.
that's a lot harder sell. And yeah, and like you said, so it's like I'm pretty much married to this squad if I
Mm-hmm.
want that level of caliber to go forward.
Yeah.
And there's only with comic books, it's just like movies. We're working on the same project for years at a time,
Yeah.
so it's just like, well, I'm stuck on this one for a while. It's like, and
Yeah.
I'll take meetings and privately or like with agents, and it's just like, yeah, it's harder for people to be like take you on as you as a sole writer when everything I have that is of merit is co-created with other people, and yeah, they don't know like how much of talent do I personally have. Um, yeah, so anyway,
Yeah. After we booked Kane and Lynch, like Jiho and I took a lot of meetings together as a writing team and went after a lot of jobs. And, and then actually that was after Air. And then Kane and Lynch was the first job we booked together as a team. And, but it was when Killers happened, that then enabled me to then kind of take meetings on my, go back to taking meetings on my own and go after my own jobs. So like that's, I think what you're saying is like you have your squad and you know that that's a path and you can get stuff made. And then, but you have to, if you want to do your own things, you have to kind of reinvent yourself every once in a while. You have to remind people, oh no, I do good stuff by myself. But that means then you're sitting in a room writing a script by yourself. And that's what I did with Killers. And so I still was able to have this sort of career where Gio and I are doing a path, and then I was doing a path. It's just Gio and I's path eventually stalled. And then we wrote a couple more scripts together and they just didn't go anywhere, unfortunately. And like he ended up in another business and is super successful. But we still meet and pitch ideas, and I hope that we'll get to work together again someday. But then, Killers enabled me to kind of then lean into my own career and keep moving on my own path. And so that's what I did. And that kind of took me to the next stage of my career.
so yeah, what have you been doing since Killers, and what is it now like a day in the life of you're a full-blown just an LA screenwriter.
Yeah.
What's the difference between you and someone that you were saying that's like a part of the studio system? Like, does that person have a salary or how does that
No, no,
work?
I mean, let me give you a quick rundown of where I've been because after I wrote a few scripts after Killers, and things were very tough after the strike. And Killers, I'm grateful for it. I got to buy a house, opened in thousands of theaters. It's still on streaming. I'm grateful that people get to see it and enjoy it. We were the number two movie on Netflix for a week last year. That was fun.
Nice.
But the movie didn't turn out awesome, so it didn't, do everything for my career it could have, but it did a lot. I got into a lot of rooms. I pitched on a lot of projects. I ended up writing a spec TV pilot, which got me a job on the TV show White Collar. So I worked on White Collar for a season, which was an awesome experience. I worked with an amazing team of writers and learned a ton about TV writing. I came out of that a little distracted in the sense that I was pitching TV shows, but I was also trying to write original features. I was trying to have both a TV and a feature career at the same time, and neither of them went anywhere. My career tanked. So, like, White Collar was pretty much the end of my first 10 years in LA as a screenwriter. My next 10 years were a struggle. Like I ended up with a different manager after White Collar. I ended up with different reps altogether. And I had rough years where I didn't make any money. Luckily, Killers paid me enough that I could kind of coast for a while. But it got scary for a while. I hit that moment where I think a lot of screenwriters do once you've had 10 years in the business where you can kind of just leave, go teach somewhere. But I didn't want to leave yet. I had the stuff I wanted to do. So I do a lot of theater. I have my whole career, and that's another thing I always fall back on. I write these ridiculous late night shows with my good friend, Ben Rock, who is, we direct a lot of this stuff that I wrote. We were members of a theater company called Sacred Fools. And so we were doing a bunch of stuff. And Ben at one point was like, you know what? If you we could actually shoot something. I've got my own gear. We could just take this energy we put in the theater and actually make, a show. And so we co-created a horror comedy web series called 20 Seconds to Live, which you can find online. It's 20secondstolive.com. We ended up making, they're like these short little 2-minute anthology episodes. They're funny and ridiculous and super bloody. And we played like over 20 festivals worldwide. We won a bunch of awards, didn't make a buck, but remembered what it was like to be filmmakers together. We had a great time. And we took a little detour into audio. Ben and I co-wrote a horror podcast for Shudder called Video Palace that Ben directed. That was created by Nick Braccia and Mike Manello, Mike being one of the producers of Blair Witch Project. And so it's kind of a found footage thriller slash horror narrative podcast that we're super proud of. And so we had a blast with that. And then After that, Audible approached us because they loved the show and asked Ben and I to make a show for them. So we sold a show to them called Catchers, which is like a monster movie for the years. That came out just a few years ago, and you can get that on Audible. So basically, I was just kind of figuring out how to stay in this business. And I was, like I said, I was doing audio, I was doing a web series, I was still writing scripts. I had to, at one point, I lost all my reps. I left all my reps because I just wasn't going anywhere. My second manager was not a good fit creatively. He's a good guy, but we just didn't make any money together. My agents kind of outgrew me. And so I was on my own, just sending out new scripts to producers. And I had a really lean little thriller that I sent to Naveed, who was that producer, gave me my first job in Hollywood. And now he and another guy I've known my whole career are co-producing that project, which, we've attached a director and putting financing together. So like all of us, it took years, but I'm kind of writing my way back out of it. I've got, that another script I wrote, an action comedy I wrote over a decade ago. Another producer, one of the producers of Air I Breathe, actually came on board, and I did a bunch of rewrites for him. And then now he attached another producer, and then there's a big director circling. So that one feels like we're close. So, I'm finally, kind of seeing my career kind of coming back. I wrote I got another movie made finally. Sorry, I buried the lead there. Um, uh, as I was with these various projects that I had going, I finally started getting some bites from some reps again. So I signed with a new manager, and I pitched him some ideas. And he picked one, and I wrote it. It was a action thriller called Wanted Man that I ended up signing with a new agent, and that agent and my manager worked together to send that script out. This was about 2 years ago. And, I got a bunch of general meetings, and, I went on the water bottle tour again, this time on Zoom. But, and I met, 9 companies were like, we love it. We just got something just like it. Can't buy it, but let us know when you write your next thing. The 10th company was a company called Filmbridge, and they optioned the script, and they ended up making it. And they shot it in Malta right before the strike last year with Aaron Eckhart and Tim Roth. And Abigail Breslin's been retitled Classified. And it's like, about a $10 million action thriller, and hopefully coming out soon. So
Well,
and that was like, I remember figuring out the date that Classified started shooting, I think almost 13 years to the day after, after Killer started shooting. There was some connection there. Basically, it's been 13 years since I had a movie made. So I had this long dry spell. I worked in TV and did other things and got to make some shows that I'm super proud of. But it was a long dry spell feature wise. So finally having another feature coming out with then a couple of other projects in development right behind it feels really good. But it's not, when you ask about my day to day. Sorry, any follow up questions? Do
no,
you want me to jump into
I'm
the?
just
Yeah, so
enthralled.
like now I'm at this point because now I'm in. That was the second 10 years of my career, was this kind of this dry spell and moving into audio and getting this new movie Classified made. So that was the second 10 years. Not as lucrative as my first 10, but got to make a bunch of stuff I'm proud of. I'm super proud of the shows I got to make with Ben. I think Classified turned out really cool. I'm excited for people to see that. And then, I finally got some momentum in my career again. It's a different moment in the career. So like I don't think Wanted Man as a script didn't get me like all of a sudden dozens of meetings and pitching on open writing assignments, because I think open writing assignments are much harder to come by. And so I'm just focused right now on writing original material. So like I said, I've got multiple projects with various producers and directors attached. I just started a new script yesterday, honestly. I started a new action thriller that I'm working on. It's my 39th script, I believe. I can't try to keep track. So,
Is there ever anything that you write that you like try to produce yourself, or like take extra efforts to be like with the connections you have and almost get stars and directors and stuff attached yourself, in the sense to where, because, or almost to where it'd be like, you read a comic book or something and be like, this is going to be great. Like almost to where you see from the perspective of the producers, and try to go that route with keeping yourself as the writer, and then also considering yourself as like a director or something like that. Have you ever thought, or is that like kind of too really difficult to do or something?
it's let me think. It's definitely a path, and it works in the right circumstance with the right script. So that's sort of what I did with the little action thriller. And this was the script that sort of I was the first script I wrote for myself when my career was going very, very badly, when there just nothing was happening, when the phone was not ringing. I wrote this little action thriller called Cuffed. And that's the script I was just, I left my reps, they weren't helping. I was like, okay, I'm on my own with this script. And so I just started sending it to producers that I knew because I just didn't know what else to do. And that's, Navid responded. He got another producer involved. They found a director they really liked, who I then met with the director. I did, some work on the script. So we're a little indie team. I think Navid and my other producer, Eric, do the heavy lifting on that project. But that would never have happened if I hadn't sent some emails and just sent my script to producers that I knew. But at this point, my producers are doing the hard work of like pitching that project and trying to put the financing together. But that was an instance of me kind of taking my career into my own hands. I've been lucky in the audio world that Ben and I have been, paid for both the shows we made. We didn't get paid a lot, but we had budgets to work with. But Ben and I have talked like we could make an audio show on our own tomorrow. We've got the gear, we've got enough, friends, who are great actors that would be in our show. It'd just be a lot of work, but that's a way for us to create something, and then we own the IP and we can then take it out. But it's all a matter of where do you put your energy and where do you put your time.
Yeah.
So like, as far as, producing a film myself, I've never been the guy who wanted to go out and put together the financing. I direct, I used to direct, and I directed a no budget indie many, many years ago that taught me that I'm a better writer than I am a director. And Ben and I, our goal is to kind of, is to use these our kind of our friendship and this aesthetic we've built over our web series and our audio shows to eventually make movies together where either I write the script or Ben and I co-write the script and then Ben directs the script. And we have projects that we would like to do, but we also need to make a living at it. So we can't, take 3 years of our life to make a movie that costs, that has a budget of under $1 million, where everybody gets paid a few bucks to work on it. Excuse me. And the thing is like plenty of filmmakers do that and they launch their careers, and plenty of filmmakers do that and it doesn't launch their career, and then they make another one and they make a whole slate of films. So it's kind of just a matter of what your path is and what the writer wants to accomplish. And I know plenty of screenwriters, they're like, I'm just going to go make a comic book because that's a way for me to actually make something that I can put on my shelf and I can feel proud of. So it's all a matter of just where you want to put your time and energy. So for me, I'm focused, LA is an expensive town and I like making a living. So I'm putting a lot of energy into projects that I feel are, high concept action thrillers that can be made at the right price. I have, various levels of projects and various projects and kind of various stages of getting made. I feel like if I have enough irons in the fire, one or more of them will get made soon. Ben and I co-wrote, a fun monster movie that's, out in the world now. And we hope to get that financed and put together. That'd be a little bit a higher budgeted movie than, some of my other things. But I don't know. It's just I'm just kind of gambling on where my time is best spent on these various projects and what I think is going to help me get a movie made and also help me make a living.
How much do a lot of the people that I talk to are always talking about, oh, and I happen to see things in a similar light to where we're at a transitional period with streaming, and people talk about how Hollywood is sort of upended and dead in certain areas, and the barrier to entry to make movies is totally different than it was 15 years ago. And like, how much do you contribute, or how much do you really see the industry, so to speak, has changed? Like, do you think it's just we're at the same, we always hit every decade or two a kind of change from VHS and Blockbuster to streaming, and there'll be another thing in another 10 years? But do you see the core system as sort of staying the same and screenwriters having sort of the same role and opportunities? Or do you really see it like a lot of people were like, no, it really is like changed for a lot, and like it's a lot more independent focused and being able to sell yourself and social media and all that.
I think the main the main change I've seen in 20 years, and aside from streaming and the change in technology, but you're right, that always comes along. There's always something that upends it. And then Hollywood eventually will figure out the economics and everything will work to some degree. I think the biggest change and the most difficult change for writers that I've seen is that Hollywood spends a lot less on development. So Hollywood used to buy a lot more scripts. You used to see every day in the trade somebody sold a script for six figures, or somebody optioned a script when, attached to direct. There's just you saw a lot of those kinds of deals. You don't see those deals very often anymore because, it's very rare that Hollywood just buys a script anymore. So it used to be, a studio would buy a script or option a script, and then they would pay the writer to rewrite it. And then, you know, maybe they'd fire that writer, and then it becomes an open writing assignment, and then another writer can come in and get paid to work on it. And then every time that happened, somebody was making a paycheck and making a living and able to put food on the table. So like there was a lot more open writing assignments, a lot more scripts getting bought and made. And and Hollywood is spending less money on that. So what happens now is studios expect producers to bring in fully packaged projects. So if I hang on, I'm gonna let a dog out.
Okay.
Go out, sweetie. So instead of like Lionsgate preemptively, optioning my script and giving me a bunch of money and then taking on the financial burden of developing that project, instead, Lionsgate or fill in any studio here, they just ask their producers, bring us projects when it's ready. So then that producer has to go out and find a script from a guy like me, and they have to attach a director and they have to attach actors, but nobody's getting paid at this point. And so if they need to develop the script, I'm writing for free, which the WGA does not want me to do, not want anybody to. So it's like all of a sudden that money that used to change hands, getting a project from this is a pretty good script to this is ready to shoot, they're spending a lot less on that. And the burden is on us to do the development. The burden is on producers, to put together these packages. And I think that's really it's just a lot less work out there. And there's a lot less opportunities. I think the opportunities, there's a few opportunities for brand new writers that are affordable. I think, your top dog screenwriters still work all the time. I think a lot of these in the middle class screenwriters like myself, it's harder. There's just less work. And so what's replaced that is sort of the indie model, like my script I told you about before, Cuffed, and I have another one that's it's it's probably about a $40 million action comedy. That's still going to essentially have sort of an indie model where an independent financier is going to come on board and help put that movie together. And they might make a $40 million movie and then sell it to Lionsgate or some other studio. Still essentially an independent film. It's just kind of done at a higher level. Luckily, that's still an option for writers. But the kind of the bread and butter of I can go out and I can pitch on a bunch of jobs and maybe book one and make my year's rent. Those jobs are, I haven't pitched on many jobs in a long time, but you just don't hear, I don't hear about a lot of those jobs. I don't have a lot of friends that are booking those jobs. So I feel like that's been the one change that makes it a lot harder to make a living in this industry.
Huh. Dang, yeah, that exactly what you said is why I have a lot more connections now. Is because people that are, as you said, like the middle class screenwriters, I have people that wrote and co-wrote with movies almost a decade before you were sort of in the game that are
Mm-hmm.
now kind of like I'm sort of retired and now but I'm still trying to write and they're
Yeah.
getting into the independent comic book field and so because just like you're saying it's like they can still get what they wrote out there and not have to hustle and bustle about to get to write stuff that no one will ever see and if they've had babies scripts that they've been sitting on for years now's the chance to sort of let that shine. And there's a whole nother route with comic books now of them turning into studio films. So it's kind of like a win-win to where it's like I at least get what I want out there the way I want it, and there's potential for it to be a bigger movie than if I were to try to go the low budget or mainstream independent route.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and the good thing is like there's comics, there's narrative podcasts and audio, there's fiction, books are still a huge deal. There's all these different mediums around film and TV. They don't pay as well as film and TV, but you can still get your stuff made. And then film and TV loves IP, they love intellectual property. So then optioning your stuff back to film and TV is another way to kind of keep your projects alive and make a living. So that's the good thing is I feel like back in the day, like you were one thing, you were a feature writer, or you were a TV writer, or you were a comic book writer, and getting somebody to go, but no, I want to write movies too. Getting out of whatever lane you were in into another lane was very difficult. And I think out of necessity, writers write everything. You kind of have to. You kind of
Mm.
have to have a lot of, a lot of different levels of expertise in different mediums. And hopefully that all kind of feeds itself. I'm writing my first novel right now. I've published a bunch of short stories and like, and so there's all of a sudden there's all these other opportunities and you can still cobble together a living. It's just, it's tricky, but there's opportunities out there for sure.
Yeah, it'll never die, and it'll still
Yeah.
be like there'll still be a generic sort of path. But I feel like it's always been this way to where, in reality, those that sort of the outliers are, they don't follow the mold in a sense, and it's not because they are necessarily thinking out of the box or something. It's just there's so many routes to go about this. Like you said, it's you could be in one lane, whatever path that you might think you're on, a new opportunity might arise to where you could have gone one way if you did the co-writing thing and been this team that had another big hit film or something, or did it wrote the, if Kane and Lynch became a franchise that would originally thing, that would have been a whole nother path. Or I don't know, it's I love this the world that we live in, so to speak. I mean, the entertainment world, and it just someone like you is just so rare, so to speak. Just somebody to be a living, somebody that makes a high quality living writing, creative writing. That's just for somebody to have that kind of success and career is just so it's nice that it's that I can talk to you, and it's like we're still in this just like the same atmosphere, it's there's it's not like this big gap between everybody. Um, and yeah, I don't know. So I'm really happy you came on, and I've learned a lot, and I still have like a bunch of more like specific if I really wanted to get into the nitty gritty of like how important was like pitching and what were the meetings like, but that'll be for another one. I think we're at an hour now.
Yeah, if you want, Max, we'll wait. My movie will come out. Maybe we can maybe after that I'll come back and we can talk more nitty-gritty and chat about the making of that project. And
That would be awesome. Yeah,
yeah,
we we should definitely do a part two after that movie's out,
that
and
sounds
and
good.
maybe yeah, that kind of leads into, and we'll get into it next time. But it's like, how much are you involved in sort of the marketing of your own movies, and how much of a difference does it make? Do you feel if like if you had a huge following or something like that on social media, that if 10% of those people saw the movie, like would you be like expecting producer credit or like a percentage more or anything like that? Or anyway, we'll get into all that next time.
That sounds good. And by the way, I do not have a large following, but I have a nice following. I enjoy the people I chat with online. So that's how we met. So yeah, I
Yeah,
appreciate you inviting me. This has been really fun.
yeah, definitely. Thanks again for coming on, and we're definitely going to stay connected. And I'll and let me know on social media whenever that movie is about to launch.
Sure will. Thanks, Max.
All right, see ya.